Welcome to the Captain's Table. It's a little bit different tonight. My good friend Rex has changed shape.
Jimmy, it's great to be back after probably 4 or 5 months, having been to partaken in the first couple. So it's lovely to be back. Rex is on holiday, enjoying himself.
Rex is on holiday. Hope the holiday's going well, Rex.
I'm sure you've seen some comments.
Well deserved. He's put some hard yards into the Captain's Table, and we hope he gets well and comes back in a couple of weeks' time. So it's good.
Hopefully. Maybe.
But tonight I'm very excited because we've got a very special guest, John Deacon, in town after being here for many, many years. Mm-hmm. What I would call, I'm not going to throw the word legend around because that gets thrown around or not, but
and it would be ridiculous, actually.
So, James, can I just interrupt? Because actually, I've known John for a long, long time, and John has always been known as a legend to me because he was always the person I spoke to many, many years ago.
Yep.
The advice that I've been here a lot longer than you, but he's always the face and the voice for me in July.
But this is only the first time I've met you.
Over.
No. Well, there's another story.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, welcome, John.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No. It's great. You've definitely been on our list for a long time. It's been a matter of catching you and getting it, but the stars are in shape tonight, so that's perfect. So John, welcome. And what we want to do today is really just get an understanding about your life in Dubai, how it all started, when you arrived, etc. Mm-hmm. And because this is what the Captain's Table is all about. Great stories, identities, and getting it from there. So when did you arrive to this wonderful place?
Well, it's a bit of a story, really, and that's what we're looking for, I guess, is stories. But I was working for the Daily Express and Daily Star in Fleet Street, and in fact, I just had a huge promotion to work with a team of 10 guys on the launch of the Daily Star, first new newspaper then in Britain for 100 years, 1978 this was. Wow. And so we duly launched it. It was a load of rubbish, really, and edited by Derek Jameson, of all people, who was permanently drunk, but you could get your expenses signed off really easily by Derek. And
this was before Rupert Murdoch and all this kind
Murdoch
of stuff?
had nothing ever to do with the Daily Express. He was in Bouverie Street with the Sun, News of the World. Okay. And actually, I'm very privileged in a way to have worked in Fleet Street at that time because I was right there in the middle of the transition from hot metal newspaper publishing to digital. And when I was there, Murdoch literally overnight moved everybody out of Bouverie Street to Wapping, which nobody knew. It was the best kept secret probably ever in the history of the world. So it was a great time. I loved working there. It was amazing. But my boss, a guy called Mike Harvey, who was the ad manager of the Daily Star, I got a job in Ajman, of all places. Right. And we all laughed and laughed and laughed at this. His face.
After you'd got the atlas out?
After I got the atlas out.
To find out where Ajman was?
Well, that's interesting. I'll come on to that in a minute. So he goes to Ajman, just disappears. And then my best mate, Daily Express, Daily Star, it was really my soulmate, a guy called Mike English, was headhunted by the first Mike. So he disappears. And I was quite disconsolate at this. After about 3 months on a crackly telephone line from Ajman, centre of civilization, Mike number 2 called and said, "Mate, you've got to come. Take a break, take a holiday, just come for a couple of weeks. You are going to be amazed at this place. It's unbelievable." That's the point at which I got the atlas out. And another colleague at the time, a rather dour Scotsman, a bit like me really, said, well, I've heard of a place called Sharjah, but grown men in the RAF used to turn up in Sharjah and cry. So that wasn't a very good advertisement. But anyway, off I went to Ajman on a Gulf Air flight. And it just...
What year was that?
78. Yeah, September 78. That's
London, Bahrain, Dubai.
Correct. I think it was on a Super VC10, built in 1963, if I remember rightly.
So what was the job that he kind of
So this is what happened. So the two Mikes were really the superstars of Daily Express, Daily Star advertising sales. And they had been headhunted by a company called Parish Rogers International to establish a telephone directory and a Yellow Pages for the precursor of Etisalat, which was called Emirtel. Emirtel was half owned by the Abu Dhabi government and half owned by Cable and Wireless. Anyway, it was taken over by the UAE. It was renamed Etisalat, and a company called Hawk Publishing in Ajman won the contract to publish Yellow Pages and do a telephone directory.
Okay. All paper.
Of course. It was 1978. Yeah. There was not even a fax machine around in 1978. Oh, really? Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I feel so old all of a sudden. Anyway, that's all right. So it was a very cool thing. So I go over. Now, the owner of Hawk Publishing is a very famous Ajmani businessman called Abdullah Muhammad Murad. He was very close to the ruler and was his chief advisor or wali, and had made a fortune not through Hawk Publishing but through United Colour Film Company. Now, United Colour Film Company had 1 million shops all over the Emirates, and it's where you went with your film out of your old camera. Yeah. You popped it in, you were given a receipt, and then the next day you would come back and you'd have all your prints, your 24, your 36, right? And he was also the agent for Kodak, through which he had made a huge sum of money. Sure. His passion was television. Yeah. So he built a full-on television studio in the desert in Ajman, which is now Ajman Independent Studios. It's got a broadcast license for him. It's still there. In those days, it was a facilities house making programming for the Egyptian, Lebanese, Syrian and Jordanian markets, because there were not enough film studios or TV studios. Sure. So he comes up with this idea. He builds a stunning studio. It was 2 big studios, actually. Studio A and Studio C. He builds management and staff housing, and he builds a hotel. Why does he build a hotel? Because the programming that he's going to make is going to be basically like historical or Arabic or Arabian drama programs. Yeah. You need a cast. The casts all came from Egypt, including some very famous actors and actresses. He would fly them out, put them up in the hotel for 6, 7, 8 weeks, during which they would make these 100-episode TV dramas, right? And they would be done as if it was film. It wasn't done as if it was TV. Yeah. So you'd all these cameras that weren't used because you just use a single camera. Yeah. It's done like film. Yeah. So long story short is that I blag my way into a job with Ajman Independent Studios as a producer, never having ever in my life set foot in any form of TV studio or facilities house.
Or in Ajman.
All in Ajman. Yeah, I'm given a 4-bedroom, because in those days it was, most people had a total package. You know, you get a salary, housing, healthcare, everything. Yeah. You got no choice about where you're going to live. Anyway, there was nowhere to live. Yeah, right. But I'm given a 4-bedroom house on the compound with the TV studios. And so that's how I came to be in Ajman. And the job was terrible. Yeah. I was rubbish at it. Yeah. I had a boss who was a Syrian guy who'd learned all his stuff about TV in Germany. Yeah. He spoke German and Arabic, but no English. And from the day I walked in to the day I left 6 months later, he did not say a word to me in any language. But I met a very cool actress from Egypt who I kind of squired for a while, a lady called Nadia Al-Kalani, who's very famous. She died sadly a number of years ago. So I had this Egyptian girlfriend. And then I met my second wife, having had a first wife in the UK as a very young guy. I met the lovely Mandy.
All so in that. Also, as Mike English, I know from the time when the Entertainer were doing Mike.
Superbrands.
Yeah, Superbrands.
So Mike is now the worldwide Superbrands Supremo.
Super Brands used to be those big books.
Yes.
It still is.
Still going, is it?
Unbelievable. Still going. I mean, obviously been hit a little bit by COVID. By the way, I'm a Super Brands ambassador, and I am the MC every year of the Super Brands events in Dubai and in Malaysia. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Another
Congratulations.
story for which I have learned to speak a little bit of Bahasa Malay and can say things to people in audiences and make them laugh. That's very, very weird.
So what do you always say? Like, you were the original Tom Urquhart.
No, that's too kind. But Tom is a sterling superstar and has got proper credentials. Tom was the Daily Telegraph stringer here for a while, so he's pucker. The other thing about Tom, actually, I'm very annoyed about Tom because he's far too good looking. Because if you're lining up people to go and present an event, the MC, you look at somebody like me and you look at Tom Urquhart every bloody time. Even I would bow to the good looks, and
he's a good-looking man.
He's a very good, and he scrubs up well.
His banter's not as good as yours.
No, not at all. Not at all. We've had Tom on the show, and currently at the moment,
I don't believe it.
It's
and he's been fantastic on all the things. Actually, we've crossed over doing things here so many times. We were both sort of, in a bizarre way, headhunted for no money to go to Dubai Eye when it launched in 2005 by a mad Australian called David Marshall and a tall South African called Gavin Dickinson. Tom got the gig of doing breakfast, I think, or maybe mid-morning for a long time. Because I had a proper job doing real things, I volunteered to do a couple of shows at the weekend.
Sure.
And I ended up having 3 shows. So Tom and I would see a lot of one another down at the station, usually complaining about how mental David Marshall was. Yeah.
So we missed a little bit there after the Ajman, 6 months.
Yeah, a lot you've missed.
So
30 years.
Yeah, let's. So you've had enough of Ajman.
Well,
the Syrian boss.
It was a mutually agreed position.
Agree to disagree.
Honest, meaning that I kind of got shuffled out. I mean, I was ready to go.
Okay.
And you're 26, and you don't care, do you? I think as you get older, you begin to care because you've got school fees and children, and but when you're young, you just think it doesn't matter. And I got that into my mind that it didn't matter. Didn't leave under the best of terms. But the very day I left, I ended up in a terrible, terrible pub in a 3-star hotel in Deira.
That's happened to a few of us.
With Mandy.
You're not the only one.
Yeah, I know. And it wasn't New York. I promise you.
We didn't say it was the York.
You've been alluding to such things. On the dry, and we'll talk about that later. This is a family show, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sitting with my then brand new girlfriend. I think she was a bit annoyed that I'd left my glamorous job in television, not knowing that it wasn't.
And what about the Egyptian lady? She was disappointed.
Gone. She'd gone, but then she'd finished filming her programming and then gone back, and we never met again. Anyway, and I bumped into a guy called Ronnie Middleton. Now, Ronnie was the son of the former head of British Airways for a huge macro region, which included EMEA and Pakistan. And he'd been brought up as an expat brat. They'd ended up in Bahrain. Dad had retired, and Ronnie kind of just hung around in Bahrain, and he was very clever. He himself had worked for British Airways for a while. He got to know a man called Anwar Mohammed Abdul Rahman, who was the owner of the daily Arabic newspaper in Bahrain called Akhbar Al-Khalij, and over a beer, because in those days all the locals drank, and wore business suits, by the way. They weren't in Honduras like they are today in Bahrain. No, nobody.
Interesting.
So Anwar and Ronnie said, let's set up a English language newspaper, a companion to Akhbar Al-Khalij, which is called Gulf Daily News. It was the first tabloid in the region. And anyway, Ronnie then does well, makes a lot of money from advertising, and suddenly he's in Dubai, and he says to me, "You're the guy, aren't you, who used to work for the Daily Express?" I went, "Yeah." "How do you know?" He said, put a few feelers out. He said, "Come and work for me." I said, "Where?" He said, "Here, because we're setting up an office and we're going to launch 5 business-to-business magazines. A construction magazine, a shipping magazine, a banking magazine, and a couple of magazines aimed at expats." Right? which will be filled hopefully with financial services advertising. So over the course of several small orange juices, literally at the back of an envelope is produced in a pen, and I get my contract, and I start with him like almost the next day.
Yeah.
And it just went gangbusters. You know, it was good timing. It was kismet, because the construction magazine in particular, and this was in the real boom days and all over the Middle East. It was called Gulf Construction and Saudi Arabia Review. And there was a prototype had been launched to show to advertisers. The prototype had 36 pages of advertising in it, right? Yeah. And after a year, our Gulf Construction magazine was almost difficult to bind. It was 300 and something pages, 70% of which was advertising.
And that was a monthly? Or?
It was monthly.
Monthly publication.
So, and all of these magazines did very well. So I did that for 5 years.
So Ronnie's a great guy. So Ronnie done it really well, because I think his dad or him were the last people to fly Concorde into Bahrain.
That's right. Yeah. I think the whole family did.
And Ronnie used to have the entertainer in Bahrain.
Did he?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I never knew that part.
Yeah.
So I had a wonderful time. Ronnie was a wonderful boss, very positive, never had a bad word to say about anything or any situation.
Biggest office in your life.
You know?
Biggest office.
And he used to say, it's going to be enormous. That was it was a company called Al Hilal Publishing and Marketing Group. Yeah. And he used to say, it's going to be enormous, JD. It's going to be enormous. Stick with us. So I did that for 5 years. Built a huge office in Dubai. Yeah. About 35 people working for me. All those days, you go to London, you would advertise on the Capital Radio job spot for sales execs, and you would bring over Brits. And Ronnie and I would go and recruit in a hotel, and the Capital Radio job spot applicants would turn up, and it got to the stage where even before we'd ask them a question, we would just say, when can you start? We just, because it was too boring to go through so, when did you start with, scouting monthly, so we just hired everybody.
But did they know what they were getting into?
No, because it was all typically the person I had been 9 months previously, a little bit tired of. Yeah. And of course, in that era in London, it was after the 3-day week and the miners and all that. Things were not exactly hunky dory. Although I do remember, going backwards to London, I do remember those are the days of Daily Express gave everybody a company car, which was not treated as a benefit in kind, so not taxed, and you could drive into central London. I lived in Chiswick, park, and then in the daytime do your rounds around the advertising agencies. My patch was Paddington and Soho, and you would just go up at lunchtime, find a parking place, take some hapless media buyer out for a very good lunch, and then drive back to the Daily Express, then go to the pub, then go to Covent Garden to a pub called Brahms and List, and then drive home at 11 o'clock at night, stopping at the Wimpy Bar in Chiswick, and then wake up in the morning about 4:30 with the remnants of a cheeseburger all down your suit, which you'd never got out of. Get up, change a tie shirt, brush your teeth, and do it again. That was London. But anyway, there was so much potential in these EMEA markets in those days. Al Hilal were wonderful. They were so good to me.
So before that, what was there as a publication? Was anything there?
No, they were repping. Ronnie had a brother called George, and George was in Dubai repping bits and pieces of Bahrain stuff. But the hub for the magazine operation was really Dubai. Yeah. And then what happened was I did that for 5 years, got married to Mandy, and then in 1984 I was sent to London to do an exploratory strategic review of potentiality for us opening an office in London. They liked what they saw. So a year later, they said, we want you to go to London and open an office in London.
And the publications from here would go there?
Well, we were selling. So you take Gulf Construction. Yeah. So instead of trying to sell So it was fine if you were selling to a company here.
Sure.
You know, or a company who had established themselves here. But there were many thousands of companies who were just selling into the Middle East through representation.
We would love to get
So suddenly you were in London and JCB, for example, would be a target.
Right.
You'd go to JCB and you'd meet their communications guy, their ad guy, and you would sell him whatever. And then we had a publication called Middle East Expatriate. I hired a wonderful lady called Aldith Stein to sell that, and she became very popular with the sort of advertising agency crowd. And
was that more of what was that more?
That was more. So that was all financial advertising for expats. So in the days that you would, you wanted an offshore account in Jersey, Isle of Man. Sure. So that was her patch. It was Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, some London, a lot in Scotland actually, because in Scotland and Edinburgh there was if you remember, before they all went bust, we'd RBS and Bank of Scotland and whatever in those days.
So before likes of De Vere and...
Yes, before De Vere had pitched up in town here. So Aldith would go... I remember I went with her once to meet a guy called Johnny Struthers in Edinburgh, who had an advertising agency called Struthers Advertising, unsurprisingly. And he had the RBS account. And so she would warm him up on the phone. And so we flew up to Edinburgh. He picked us up at the airport in his Bentley, drove us into the agency, introduced the media buyer. And he just said to the media buyer, I love this magazine called Middle East Expatriate. I want you to book 12 back covers for RBS for the next year. And it was huge money. Yeah, right. And we would be so excited that we would typically drink ourselves silly on the plane back into London. And I don't know how we ever managed to stay legal, really. And so the London operation, and by the way, by this time, it was Thatcherism in London itself, and the whole of the city was going nuts. I opened an office for them in the city in a very interesting lane called Martin Lane, just off Cannon Street, which was above the original El Vino wine bar. And it was a strange rabbit warren kind of office, very odd landlord in the form of the owner of El Vino, who wore a wing collar and a tailcoat and would complain all the time about the girls in our office putting too many sanitary pads down the toilet because it blocked all the toilets in the pub downstairs. But it was, and then it became very lucrative, and Al Hilal really began to take off big time, So, yeah.
And that went through till...
So then Mandy got a great job in London too. She's an HR person, so she got a job as a computer software recruitment specialist, working for a company called KPG, not KPMG, who in the time she was there went from 170th in the market to number one, earned huge sums of money.
But all to get people to the Middle East?
No. So her company was all to do with the UK market. It was nothing to do with the Middle East. So we did that. Then we finally had a baby after 10 years of trying. And then Ronnie kind of welched on a deal. And he would be happy me telling this story because, which was that the deal was go to London for 5 years and then come back as the group general manager of the company. Yeah. And then 6 months before I was due to do that, I heard on the grapevine that another man called Clive Jakes had been given that job. Ronnie. And then, so I was a bit disconsolate, went home. Yeah. But this time we're living in a lovely house in Old Isleworth. Yeah. Mandy was at home having a bath. And I told her, and she said, just call him now. You got to just confront him, call it out. Called him. I said, I believe Clive's got that job. What can I tell you, So what about me? He said, well, you're doing a great job there. I said, we don't want to stay here. We want to come back. So I put my hand over the phone, called through to Mandy in the bath. What do I do? She said, resign, get a good golden goodbye amount. Yeah. I said, okay. So I said, well, look, in the circumstances, I think we have to agree for me to leave. And that was fine. And he paid me a lot of money to leave. We were then 34, I think. Both of us are 33 years old. And we thought, let's retire to the country. How mental is that?
Good on you, Ronnie. It was a good payout.
Well, it wasn't, actually, as it turned out, because we bought a stunning old house in a town called Shrewsbury in Shropshire, and attempted to turn it back into a single dwelling house. Somebody had, after the war, turned it into flats. 4-story house. And so we ploughed everything into that, bit by bit. Took months and months. And then one day I was with my builder standing outside going, how much do you think it's going to cost me to finish? And he went, maybe 5. I went, what, 5 grand? He went, no, 50 grand. And at that point we thought, oh my God, this is a money pit, what a big mistake. Right. That night it was a big storm, huge storm. We were feeling a bit gloomy. And the doorbell went. Who can that be at this time of night? Opened the door, and standing in the porch...
Ronnie.
No, Ian Fairservice.
Seriously.
Ian Fairservice, who had been a mate ever since turned up in Dubai years before, right? Bottle of champagne.
Come in. Come out of the rain. Come out of the rain.
What are you doing here? And he said, come to London. I'm opening it wasn't a branch actually of Motivate. He's opening his own company in London, but which he got permission from his partner, Obed Al-Tayr, to call Motivate. And what are we going to do? Ian's pet thing is hospitality, because he had started as an assistant hotel manager in Dubai in an old Sheraton in a place called Garden City, and then started Motivate, done very well. So here we are 10 years on, and he's done well, and he's going to do a magazine in London called Great Hospitality. So we then together in London spent a year doing Great Hospitality. By the way, didn't really need to do this job, but I wanted to do it because Ian's such a great guy and a hoot, right? And so Mandy, poor Mandy, who was now pregnant with second child, stayed in this terrible dilapidated house, the money pit. I got the train down every Monday and I came back up every Thursday. So 4 days a week I devoted to establishing this magazine, Great Hospitality. We had a blast. And it was a ticket, believe me, for eating in the finest London dining establishments 3 times a day for the whole year. We met incredible people like Anton Mosselman, Ken Howe, Jeremiah Tower in LA. We knew all the wine merchants and wineries. Is that a thing? Owners in France, Spain, whatever. We
Sounds
had
terrible.
Yeah.
Horrible job.
But unfortunately, and it was...
It went bankrupt because that's all...
Well, it didn't go bankrupt, but we were...
Too much heartburn.
We did things like... I can't remember the name. It's a very famous old restaurateur come author who... Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. And Ian, who can just charm the devil out of hell himself, persuaded this old guy who'd advanced bowel cancer to sign 10,000 copies of his book so that we could give them as an incentive for people to buy a subscription to Great Hospitality. Unfortunately, this did not go very well. The whole thing, after a year, was just a disaster. So I retreated back to Shrewsbury, and 2 days after I got back, I get a phone call, and it is from an old client in Dubai called Tony Stammers, who said there is an advertising agency, a rather large one, in Detroit, Michigan and New York. They're the 4th largest agency in the world at the moment, and they're called Bozell, Jacobs, Kenyon and Eckhart. And the international kind of guy for that company has asked me to find a guy to come and open a branch of Bozell, Jacobs, Kenyon and Eckhart in Dubai. And this guy is called Shawi Safiuddin. He's Lebanese, but he has lived for many years in Athens, and he commutes between Beirut, Athens, and New York. Okay? And he would like to meet you. Can you meet him tomorrow afternoon in Maida Vale at 5 in a hotel? So I said, yeah. Went down, met Shawi, who seemed to know all about me and just did a kind of when can you start number on me, which was rather surprising.
Yeah.
He said, the only thing is I do want you to meet the current CEO of Bazell London, who was called Roger, who was that time the Superbrands guy, and we'll come back to Superbrands.
Right.
So, of course, I walk in and it's a done deal. We go and have a lunch with another man called Murray Livington Smith, who could say salt and pepper and order off a menu in 27 languages, and who also worked for Bazell internationally. And then I got the job. And then the Gulf War happened. And then they said, oh, you'll have to stay there because being an American company, we can't insure you or your family. So we sat around for maybe 3 months until that was sorted out. Because, of course, Iraq invaded Kuwait on August the 2nd, 1990.
Yeah.
Right? So it went on for a while, and then there was the big conflagration, and then...
so what did... it's a good question. I mean, what did business in Bahrain and Dubai during that period, did it just go on as usual, or...
No, not at all.
Just shut down?
I think it shut down. And, but the thing is that if you talk to people here who've been here as long as I have, and people like, well, James to an extent, and you, well, you're 20 years, and Ronnie, I guess, you get used to the ebb and flow.
Yeah,
here.
sure.
I mean, nobody talks about the construction recession of 1984 because they simply have no perspective on it, but there was one.
Why?
I don't know. I mean, people maybe got cold feet about the pace, possibly, in 1984, but things did decline markedly. And there was a little bit of a mini recession. Nobody talks about the nationalisation of the petrol stations, which sent shivers through people, because you used to go and get petrol here from BP, Shell, or Texaco, I think. Maybe I'm not right about that, but it was definitely Shell stations, BP stations. Overnight, they were nationalised. So then you had Emirates and Enoch, EPCO and ADNOC suddenly took them all over. But there was a couple of days when you couldn't get petrol.
Right.
And, so people, but you just got used to those things,
Sure.
And again, we were all young. You were gung-ho. It was a bit like the Klondike in a sense. And you thought, well, we're doing okay, and what's the worst that can happen, And actually, the truth is, they were much more relaxed about visas in those days.
Right.
I can remember having no visa of any kind for about 9 months, and
so without, I mean, apart from Ajman TV, which was going on, and publications, and I'm sure there wasn't really, you weren't getting satellite TV or anything like that.
No, that came in 92.
So bars, I presume, hotels was a regular thing, or was there a lot of them, or what?
So that's an interesting story, because in the first part of my time here, so that was roughly 79 to 85, you would go out on a Thursday night or a Friday night to Sharjah. That was where it happened. That was where it happened.
Okay.
And of course, sadly, Dr. Sheikh Sultan Al Kazmi's son, one of his sons, passed away at that time. I won't go into the details, but it was felt by Sheikh Sultan that there were contributory factors that led to him thinking that he should create a prohibition order, which has persisted to this day.
That was 85. Or around
that
mid-80s.
That was mid-80s. It probably was 85. There was also the coup attempt in 86 in Sharjah.
Right.
When his cousin attempted to take over. Anyway, that was crushed when Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid sent the tanks down the street, and it was solved very quickly.
Solved by lunchtime?
By lunchtime, indeed.
Good.
So there were things going on, but so suddenly Sharjah, it was terrible. And there was one street that was just lined with bars and clubs and kellers and you name it, and then suddenly it was. So that
was bigger than Dubai.
Yes, that scene. And of course, Dubai had a prohibition in the 70s for a couple of years. Yeah, it was a federal order, and Khalaf al-Habtour, for whom I worked, edited and published his autobiography, tells very candidly the story of how he, in the 70s, had put enough money together to open the Metropolitan Hotel.
Right.
The original Metropolitan. Legendary, fantastic, which was, people would say, "Oh, we're not going there, are we?" And it's miles out of town, right? Can you imagine? And it had the famous Red Lion, a couple of other places. And so he tells...
There was a couple of others there. What was the other bar there?
There was Snake. Rattlesnake. And there was Don Corleone,
the best Chinese in town, actually.
Best Chinese, Summerland. Best Chinese
original,
in town. The original full-on. Anyway, Claff tells the story in his book about how he goes to London on a business trip, and the hotel has just opened. And then he hears that the prohibitionists come in, and in a fit of pique, he just got a car to take him straight to Heathrow. He got on a plane in his Western clothes, and he flew to Dubai, and he went straight to the ruler's court to see Sheikh Rashid, and he had a set of keys. And Sheikh Rashid and all the other guys were going, "Oh, Khalaf, we thought you were in London." He went, "No, I have come back." "Oh, really?" Yeah. And he just went, "Anyway, here you are, Your Highness." And he plonked the set of keys in front of him. Sheikh Rashid said, "What's this?" He said, "It's the keys to my hotel." "Oh, well, why?" He said, "Well, it's pointless now because of prohibition, And he said, and he went on a rant apparently, if we want this city to develop, if we want the expatriates to come, if you want, further development, Your Highness, with great respect, you've dredged the creek, you've created, Jebel Ali, we've got Dubai. If you want expats to come, rather than go to Saudi or wherever, you want them here and based here. If you want companies, there needs to be alcoholic beverages for sale." And within a very short space of time, discretion became the better part of valor. And the Dubai authorities discovered that the federal decree for prohibition was open to interpretation by individual rulers.
Great.
Right.
This is a great story.
So
I know, that's a great story.
And that's in his book.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So that was the mid-'80s. It was starting to grow. Expat families were obviously here for different reasons, for the power station and things like that. Publications were growing. What was the next step for you?
So I worked for Bozell. Bozell Jacobs Kenyon.
So after the Gulf was finished.
91. Then we finally came.
You could come in,
I had one of these kind of a phone call saying,
"It's on.
You need to be here like tomorrow with your family."
Yeah.
A kind former friend, he was a current friend, but who we'd known in Dubai from the previous time, found us a villa to move into straight away. And we came with a 2-year-old and a baby in a crib in
if you don't mind me asking, whereabouts was that?
It was in Safa Village. And Safa Village is on the Al Wasl Road.
Yeah.
It is the only Al Futtaim compound that they've ever built, because Al Futtaim built a lot of apartment blocks, but never. So it's a stunning compound, and it's right across the street from Safa Park. Al Wasl Road was so quiet in those days that we could let our 5-year-old kids.
Lloyd's TSB was.
It's still there. It's Lloyd's. It's now HSBC.
Yeah.
So it's just 200 yards from HSBC, and of course it's now under the canopy of the bridge which goes over the canal. I went back there recently to have a look, because we were in that house for 8 years. I went back to have a look, and I couldn't figure out, I got a bit discombobulated until I realised that to accommodate the canal, literally half of the compound had been demolished. It took me a while to figure that. Anyway, our old house had survived.
So I presume it was all sort of patches of compounds rather than built up. It was.
I don't know. This is something that's even very fuzzy in my mind. And I get asked a lot about this, about what was actually Dubai like way back, let's say 1978. And my impression was that they, more than anyone, could divine the future. They kind of knew what was coming somehow, because actually the road system was not too dissimilar I mean, it was all like two. There was a median, but it'd just be one lane on either side, and then millions of roundabouts, most of which have disappeared. So the planning was in '78, the Trade Centre had opened, run by a lovely British man called Guy Gillimard, who's still here, by the way. He'd be great to have on.
He was Capital Club, wasn't he?
And Guy set up Capital Club originally. Yeah, which became Enshaw and then became something else for various reasons. That's a big story as well. But anyway, so there's a trade centre. So to just give you an idea of the landscape of the place, so in '78, Jumeirah finished at the zoo. Do you know where the zoo, the old zoo is?
Yeah.
There was nothing else. It was just sand dunes after that, right? Towards where we're now sitting, which is in Barsha.
Okay, that was the end.
There's nothing.
So no Chicago Beach Hotel?
No, Chicago Beach. No, when I say nothing, I mean there was no villas, no complexes, nothing. And then eventually there was the Chicago Beach Hotel, and after the Chicago Beach Hotel, where the Ritz-Carlton now is, was the 100 villas. So there were 100 bungalows, which were actually quite sought after, as was the CBV, Chicago Beach Village. But that was kind of it. And so Dubai was more oriented in those days towards Deira, I would say.
Yeah, that's right.
And Bur Dubai, literally, across the creek.
Well, that was, I mean, right up to the 90s, really, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, when we used to come for the Dubai Sevens from Saudi, you would be, the social part was Bur Dubai Deira. We were never coming up.
That's right. I mean, my office in the 80s, after I left telly and gone to work for Ronnie at Al Hilal, was in the Dubai Bank building.
On the creek.
Right on the creek. Sales guys would jump on the Abra. If they had sales calls in Bur Dubai, they'd pay 50 fils to go that way instead of the hassle of getting the car out the parking and drive all the way around.
It's witty in the...
yeah, but they would be in full suit. In those days, all my guys were suit, tie, everything, and a briefcase, often bought, if they didn't have one, they'd soon find one in a hooky shop in Dubai. I can remember, I've got a funny story from those days, actually. I can remember the story of the parking meters. Has MD told you that story before? So one day, Sheikh Rashid is being shown around developments in Dubai, and he was being shown around by the then acting director of the municipality, who was a Sudanese guy called Kazim Sultan. So he was a nice chap. And so they're in a chauffeur-driven car, and they get to Deira. And one of the municipality's initiatives was thinking through a consultancy project, probably done by some American people, that it was high time they had parking meters and people should pay to park in Deira. So they get to Deira in the chauffeur-driven car, and Sheikh Rashid says, "What are all these poles that have suddenly appeared everywhere?" "Oh, Your Highness, those are parking meters." "What is a parking meter?" "Well, Your Highness, people now have to pay to park." How do they do that? Well, the thing at the top of the pole, they take out a couple of coins and they put it in, and that gives them a set time to park. Sheikh Rashid said, "No, I don't think so." "No, we've set up Dubai as tax-free, no letter hindrance, no regimes of any kind, so you just have to get rid of them." By this time, they had hired traffic wardens who walked around in peaked caps and uniforms. But the meters weren't operational, so the traffic wardens, hundreds of them, were all training, little books to write tickets. And then overnight, so several years on, maybe 3 or 4 years, all around Deira, all those streets, the poles had been removed, but they'd been removed by cutting them off about maybe 100 centimetres off the ground.
Good for your shins.
So it was just funny things like that would happen in those days. I love all these stories. And Sheikh Rashid was right. I mean, that was the whole idea, wasn't it?
But I do like the way Yeah, not so much into it.
No, and very calm, you know. Also, there's another great, I love this other Sheikh Rashid story. This shows the vision. So I became very friendly in those days with the head of Halcrow, who were really the principal consultant to the ruler's office in those days. And they had an office next to the TV studios in the British Council, right, just across the Al Maktoum Bridge. And it was run by a very lovely, urbane British guy called Mel Stewart, whose flat in Kew I eventually bought off him. So that was years later. But Mel said that in the early days, and he predated me by at least 12 years, so it would be the early 60s, and they would go with Sheikh Rashid way out into the desert, just dunes and dunes and dunes, with his guys all in suits and ties and white shirts, everything done up. And it would be about building the highway, you know, that would connect eventually with the highway being built up the way, you know, from Abu Dhabi. And so the Halcrow guys would, of course, done plans, and they would made suggestions and said we should do this or that, and here's the location. And so Mel can remember being with His Highness Sheikh Rashid and saying, well, so we think it basically should be here. And Sheikh Rashid would go, no, come with me. And they would walk 150 meters across a dune and go, it should be here. Why, Your Highness? Because that piece of land, bear in mind, this is just all desert. There's nothing. No frames of reference at all. Nothing. Yeah. You see, I gave that plot of land to a Kuwaiti guy about 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
He just knew all these things. It was just in his head. It's amazing.
Wow. So now we're flowing through the 80s.
Yeah.
We're now into the 90s. Dubai's hasn't really started to 2000s. I guess we're starting into it. What was it like in the 90s?
Well, I mean, it for me, it was just booming. And I was working for the Americans. Mm-hmm. I had a strange reporting thing. I reported, straight reporting line to a guy in New York called Jerry Mathis, and I reported to a guy here because we had bought it to get into the market. We bought an existing agency. So the guy that I reported to here was the head of that agency, and frankly, he and I did not it wasn't a meeting of the minds. It wasn't a brain trust, really. And I struggled on with that for 5 years. We actually did a fantastic job. Our main client was Chrysler Corporation in those days. It was before the merger with Daimler. And Chrysler relaunched. That was my main job, really. It was relaunching Chrysler, who by that time had bought Jeep from American Motors. And they had not been in the market for the preceding maybe 20 years because, they went through a lot of financial problems in the States. So we just did a great job and everybody was very happy. But I could not work with this particular individual.
Sure.
And those days, you also didn't worry because the whole advertising sector was just going nuts. All the big multinationals had come in.
Right.
And like bees, honeybees, after the honey. Except honeybees don't go after honey, do they? Pollinate flowers and they create honey, but never mind. Wrong analogy.
We got the point.
You get the point. Yeah. So I quit, and the next day I had 2 offers, and I
love the way that when things finish,
it was amazing, and I would suggest that. It was just the right guy, the right age, the right time, the right place, right number of contacts, quite honestly. Because that's true what I say. I'm not making this up, but for many years, one thing would just segue very neatly into another. Anyway, I had 2 offers and I went for what I thought was the not so good offer, but I liked the guy very much. For me, it's always a very personal. I've got to like
the right way.
The people, the boss. I've got to. It was a company called Caspian Advertising, run by, I think, the only true intellectual that I've ever worked for in my life, called Mark Karasi. He's Iranian, but domiciled in Canada. He built up a great little agency, very creative guy too, first guy to ever make 16 mil ads here, which were way ahead of their time. And I'd known him a little bit from before. We had kids exactly the same age. That often helps too, you know, similar age. Mark's a wee bit older than me, and he just sort of said, you know, here are the keys to the agency. I know you're going to do a great job. I'm going to go back now permanently to Toronto and do a PhD. Bye. And he allowed me to hire some great additions to what was already a nice little team. I hired the best ever new business executive I've ever worked with in my life, who then went on to work with me in 3 subsequent companies over 20 years, a girl called Emma Jones, who was an uncompromising, hard-drinking monk who could drink all the clients under the table, stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning, but she'd be the first person in the office at 8 the next day.
Perfect.
And on emails, you know, no slacking. Brilliant. So I did that. And then Greg Sedgwick came into my life. Greg, get another fantastic, amazing ad guy. Terribly trendy London style. And he had a company called Sedgwick Richardson, partnered with a guy called Gareth Richardson. Gareth, by this time, had based himself in Hong Kong. And Greg was here with a bunch of very dubious business partners, and it was not going that well.
Right.
So he found a new business partner, and we got to know one another. Every Thursday for about 6 months, we would go to Harvesters in the Holiday Inn and have fish and chips
Right, yeah.
at lunchtime. And then after 6 months, he said, come on board, leave Caspian. I'll give you shares and be the joint MD with me. So, and it was a great offer. And so I went off to do that, which was TMH.
Okay.
And so that then was a huge part of my life for the next 12 years.
And TMH was such a large organisation.
Well, it was tiny when we started it. It was like, there was Greg, me, an admin girl, a couple of designers, in an office. I never got to the bottom of who actually owned it. I think it might have been Khaled Al-Taji, but I was never quite sure, in a dodgy part of Dubai. But we had such a spirit, you know, and we were trying to be deliberately a bit London, you know. Everybody had a business card with a different colour on the back, which we thought was so out there. I could bring my dog Hector to the office and he had a business card. And for a while, we really didn't know if it was going to work, because we were it was brand management we were selling. We were the very, very first homegrown branding agency in town. Again, to be much copied, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Suddenly all the old boys who'd been here for 20 years, they had a division that also did brand management mysteriously. But Greg was phenomenal, creative genius. And we picked up, after living off of beans on toast for quite a long time, we picked up simultaneously the Jumeirah business, a huge chunk of Emirates. Mind you, a lot of agencies will say, oh, we had that business. But everybody had a bit of Emirates because they were going nuts.
Two of the biggest.
And it just grew and grew and grew. And then scarily, eventually, I think we had 55 people, most of them extremely highly paid designers. But from a mix, you know, Lebanese, Jordanian, a lot of Brits. We had one American. We'd American guy whose father gifted him $10,000 worth of Apple shares when they were $6. Okay. He's now, as you can imagine, a multi-gazillionaire living in Colorado. Anyway, it was a great team spirit. And it was one of these things where we finally moved to become the 6th tenant in the new Media City in building 2, the CNN building. A lot of stories about that as well, but I think I'd better draw a veil at that point because I don't want to upset the living, and I do want to stay here for a bit longer as well. But we were there, and we built a phenomenal office, you know, pool table in the lobby and all that. Did you ever see that? Yeah. And did great work. And what I liked most was that apart from having to like the people I'm working for or with, I like stability, and there was a good 6 years between 2001 and 2007 probably, where nobody left, nobody resigned, so you would get in the lift every day with the same crew, and it was a fun company, really.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. Well, it certainly sounds you've had a rich and long history in this beautiful town, and I think it's a question we always ask is what are the main things, and obviously this could go on, but what are the main things you love about Dubai and the reason why you continue to live here?
Well, I haven't always loved it, and it's ebbed and flowed, sometimes with my mood, sometimes with how business was going. And there have been difficult times too, even with TMH when we were doing very, very well. And I'm grateful for the fact that so much of the executive offices and Dubai Holdings business was entrusted with us. I mean, at one time, we developed all the branding for just about everything on what was called the Emirates Ring Road and is now the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Road. So all the precursors to Dubai Land and the Dubai Land branding was done by one of my lovely young designers, a guy called Mike Roy. He came up with the name as well, which we laughed at. We thought Sheikh Mohammed will never go with Dubai Land. How stupid, but that was what he went with. So it's ebbed and flowed. We had, of course, the terrible crisis of 9/11. That also damaged business here quite significantly.
Right.
I like the weather. Does that sound trite? I like
No,
the weather.
of course not.
I just like it. I mean, what is there not to like? I've analysed this, and I think there are actually only 4 months a year where it's hot, really. And I mean, I in late life, I've become a runner, and I know this because I run every day, and I know, of course, my limitations when it's 45 Celsius and 90% humidity, but winter time here is magnificent.
Of course it is.
And then, and talking of running and sports, so much has developed. Triathlon, companies organising everything from triathlons to
cycling,
the spinnies
to
thing,
everything.
and a million other people have got into that, and good on them, So there's a lot more to do. I'm amazed at how restaurants seem to thrive here. Even Ian Fairservice, I think, told me that even during the pandemic, something like 35 new concept restaurants opened. Yeah. Now a lot of them are going to close down. Sorry, guys, this is true, but
that happens everywhere.
It happens everywhere, of course. And sophisticated restaurateurs, international restaurateurs know this. Yeah. But it's worth a punt. I'm proud to have been involved as well in so many, developmental things here. Gerald Lawless of Jumeirah, his first business card just said Gerald Lawless and had his mobile number on it because they didn't even know what they were going to call Jumeirah Group, And he sat in a porta cabin on the site of the demolished Chicago Beach Hotel, So just to see all these kind of things that I've worked on and off over the years.
Well, which has happened in a relatively short time.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. I would stand in my magnificent boardroom at TMH looking out over the Palm, which was being constructed, and visitors would come from all over the world, because we had international clients. And they would say, so John, you've been here for 25 years already, so how much of this was here? And I'd go, okay. And we did this 280-degree view my boardroom. And I would say, okay, nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
There was nothing. Oh, come on, there must have been. No, there was nothing. So that's an interesting thing.
Dubai Golf Course and Emirates Golf Course and maybe a Hard Rock Cafe.
Yeah. So I think that it's been a great city for entrepreneurs. I think that it allows people to thrive. I think once you get through those initial stumbling blocks of paperwork and, which free zone authority, for example, you're going to work with, or are you going to go with the DED, or, listening to advice from different people, you're fine, really. No, it's just an amazing city, isn't it?
Exactly.
You can get anything here. I mean, I can remember when you basically could get, in 1980, they had just recently introduced fresh milk, which came from the Dig Dagger farm in Ras Al Khaimah.
Yeah.
Only 6 years later, I was working on the strategy for Alain Dairy, you know. Amazing.
Build it, they will come.
And that has worked to an extent. I don't think it's always worked, but property thing that's been an issue, of course. The flipping and whatever that was going on. Some people benefited from that. Others lost their shirts on that, and that's a shame. I think
it got pretty hectic.
It did.
John, interesting because I'm working with a company who supply food and veg and stuff to the local market, and they were saying 2 years ago 75% was imported. Now it's 75% locally produced.
Yeah,
which is a testimony to what they're doing over here in terms of enabling local farmers, everything produced. Jane Bolstone doing a lot of great work there in terms of actually they're not kind of beholden to the.
No, you need to get the Kibsons guys on because they'll tell you the chapter and verse on this. And of course, one of my hobbies is hiking in the mountains of the Northern Emirates. Sorry, too many bloody posts on Facebook. But you know, over the 6 months that we've been doing that quite intensively. It's just amazing to see the amount of cultivation of land that's going on, farming, and some of it is very sophisticated farming. So that you're dead right.
But it is important. I mean, we've seen this in the last year with when you had a whole fleet of 2 major airlines being grounded. Right, where are we getting our produce? I think that probably may have been a wake-up call to a few people.
It was, I think.
Yeah, I dare say it was. And by the way, that's an interesting thing too, you know, the fact that I think it's looking like, you know, the main airlines here, and even the new ones, the new entrants, relatively new entrants, it will just come back round again, you know, and we'll be back.
It's leaner, and then they'll grow out. It'll be different.
It will be different, yeah. But that's been interesting how they can manage things really, really, really well. Those guys at, for example, Emirates and the ICD, you know, Investment Corporation of Dubai.
James, this has been for me my latest session here with you. It's been extraordinary. I love talking to John. Regularly anyway, and I think that he's given me a lot tonight from a point of view of the history. Like I've learned so much from a point of view. Some of the stories you've told have been absolutely amazing.
Some of them I just make up, you know. They're just all apocryphal stories.
But that's okay. No one ever checks it, so it's fine.
No, but for me, in terms of like James has tried to. We get so many different guests on here every week. This is just somebody who's been here since the 1970s and just given us a story around actually stuff we don't know about and have heard about.
There's people that have been here 4 or 5 years who have no understanding of what it was like 10, 15, 20 years ago. And actually, there's not many photos of it. Generally, the same photos keep coming up all the time of what Sheikh Zayed rode and different things. There's a video on YouTube of a gentleman driving from Emirates Golf Course to it might have been Chicago Beach. I mean, but there's not much of that footage around.
Yes, and that's a shame. There is actually a very good National Archive in Abu Dhabi, and it's run by a guy called Justin Cowdray. And Justin is the son of Ronald Cowdray, who was employed by the British government and was installed in various Middle East countries over his career to be the political agent. So, like, he was the political agent. That's the name for what we now call the ambassador in Qatar. But so Justin's father was an amateur photographer and took amazing photographs. And of course, we haven't covered my few years with Ian at Motivate. Here, we did the Motivate Dubai, London thing, which was moons ago. But Motivate publishes phenomenal books by Ramesh Shukla, Nur Ali Rashid, Ronald Cowdray, which are all mid-20th century photographs of what it was like in Dubai. But, you know, just 2 hours ago, before I met you for that first orange juice that we had, I had a call from another ex-airline guy whose father was an ex-airline guy, called Michael Stokes. And Michael retired maybe 4 years ago from Emirates, went back to the UK. And he said, John, I've just found all these photographs taken by my father of Dubai from the 50s and 60s and maybe early 70s. What do I do with them? So we were having a nice chat about that. But there is a lack of film.
Yeah.
Terrible lack of film. But there's some quirky things as well. There's a lovely Japanese lady who lives here in retirement called Kimi Akashima. And Kimi used to work for Gulf Air as a hostie way back. And then she and her late husband, also Japanese, worked here as an advisor about Japan issues to the government. And years ago, Kimi discovered these photographs taken by two Japanese photojournalists when they paid a visit to Dubai in 1962. So there is a book in existence called Dubai 1962, and it's just big black and white plates of photographs taken in the ruler's office and of the sheikhs and in the creek by these two Japanese photojournalists visiting Dubai. Neither of them could speak Arabic, English, or anything, and they reckon, Kimi says, that they got away with a lot of their photographs because nobody knew what the hell they were doing, or they couldn't communicate.
Yeah.
So where normally there might be a bit of a barrier, no, you can't quite take a photograph.
The photos were taken.
Yeah. And I've also got access to an amazing file of photographs which were taken by, at one point there was a Federal Ministry of Information, and the grandson was a family friend. He's one of those half and halves. He's half British, half local. That's very interesting too. I could have a whole podcast about that. Yeah. Amazing. Because they're in two cultures simultaneously.
Exactly.
One day it's a Hawaiian shirt, next day it's a kandura.
Exactly.
But Philip, the grandson of his late grandfather, brought round to my house one day huge photo albums of photographs of trade missions that were happening in the early 70s, where a young Sheikh Maktoum and a young Sheikh Mohammed, Sheikh Maktoum, of course, became ruler of Dubai after the death of Sheikh Rashid because he was the eldest son. But he was actually, before that, the Prime Minister of the UAE.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That still is, yeah?
No, he's dead. No, Sheikh Maktoum.
So Sheikh Mohammed.
Sorry, I'm talking about Sheikh Maktoum. Yeah, Prime Minister. Sorry to be so snarky there, James. Cut you off with my superior knowledge.
He's dead.
Yeah, he's dead. He's dead. And while he remains dead, but and there's all these amazing photographs of Sheikh Mohammed with the entourage of the day. Yeah. Some of whom are now quite prominent, but getting on in years, guys. Yeah. We're all in Western business suits and like slacks and smoking jackets at dinners and hacking jackets at official functions in countries all around the world. And I'm the only person to have seen this stuff. It stayed within the family. They feel that they wouldn't get permission to publish any of it, but I've seen it.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
And loved you to come back. Let's get Kimi in.
I'll tell you about radio days. Which you haven't covered. I'll tell you about my TV. Good Morning Britain days.
We can break it down into
Tom Urquhart, who you had on before. He was the presenter of a program called Good Morning Britain with a girl called Natalie Carney, Canadian. And then I was in Melbourne on business. I get a phone call from David Marshall, who was at the radio before. Where are you? I'm in Melbourne. Damn! Why? Tom has to go on a 3-week break. Could you fill in a dep? Yeah. Right? And it was just terrible and funny and unbelievable, because whereas I could read an autocue, things would happen like guests wouldn't turn up. And this was a 3-hour live program. And I think Tom's told a similar story. But I can remember one program, Natalie and I, and you have to do all that stuff like, welcome back to Good Morning Britain. Great to have you with us. Now we're going over to the weather. Turn to plasma. Weatherman Adam Ketchum would come on. By the way, weather was all pre-recorded because they'd given up, as Tom said, on, helicopters and live feeds outside broadcasts. So pre-recorded weather for it. And then you turn back. Oh, that's great. Good news, Natalie, isn't it? It's only going to be 42 today. What are you going to be doing later on? And she'd say, anyway, back to the odd cue. Anyway, our first guest today is the owner of a new flower shop in Barsha. Her name is whatever. And then there'd be somebody going, no, earpiece.
She's
Guest
not
hasn't turned up.
Stuck in traffic.
Vamp, which means just extemporize. And then,
What weather?
So, John, what flowers? Yeah. So, what was the last bouquet you bought for your wife? Oh, well, it would, and it just went on like that. And then none of the other guests turned up. But at the end of it, I had this fop sweat. And they used to put on a heavy layer of makeup. Because I've got no real eyebrows, they used to paint on eyebrows. And everything had melted into my shirt collar.
We've got to get some footage of that.
Oh,
but,
God.
A question on that is, why didn't it work?
Because it had been bought by Mohideen bin Hendi, from a Pakistani entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It wasn't really motoring. And Moy just had it in his mind, we'll do a proper full-on station. We'll have studios, we'll have great people. He hired something like 220 people because, of course, you need everything from makeup artists to graphic designers to present, the whole 9 yards. Never realizing television is a money pit, all TV. I'm worried right now about GB News in the UK because, Andrew Neil has managed to get £60 million investment. Unless he gets advertising PDQ, that will run out in 6 months, and it'll be a similar problem.
Everyone's pulling out, don't they? For some reason.
Some are pulling out because of the content, but so, I mean, we had great people. I'm still in touch with my program director, Alison, my producer. Was a lovely Lebanese, very. And some of these people had left fantastic jobs to come to City 7 TV.
Why can't we use Al Jazeera as an example? That seems to be moving ahead.
Yeah, but it's government. It's the government of Qatar. So that's, and they pour millions. So that's because it's status.
It's private again.
A huge loss of face. It's pushed as being private, but it's not. It's a government voice piece for Qatar.
Okay.
Which is why to this day they still run anti-UAE propaganda.
He agrees with us.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I'll come back. We can do.
Let's do that again.
Another thing.
But thanks.
If this works out, I mean, some of this is deportable material, right? For you, by the way, because you're the publisher of the podcast. Not for me.
No, everything goes on.
I'll just hide in the Northern Emirates. In a cave.
We don't cut anything, do we? Yeah.
No, but awesome, John. As I say, for me, this has been fantastic just to actually get some background and some.
Oh, so many good stories.
History.
And as you said, we'll get you back on again, and we'll concentrate on one or two other areas that may be topical at the time.
Yeah. No worries.
So,
lovely.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Welcome.
Thanks, John.